where news comes first. This is WECT News at 5:30, streaming live on WECT.com and the WECT News app.
Hello everyone, thanks so much for joining us for a special program tonight. We're going to take a closer look at a series of mistakes made in Bladen and Columbus counties that cost a man 37 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Joseph Sledge was convicted and later found innocent for the brutal 1976 murder of Josephine and Eileen Davis, the mother and daughter stabbed to death during an apparent robbery and sexual assault at their home in Bladen County. Well, tonight, for the first time in 40 years, WECT's Ann McAdams goes with Joseph Sledge back to the crime scene, a scene that changed his life forever. I can imagine this was just an amazing thing for you to be along with, Ann.
It was incredible. I'm going to take you from 1976 to 2017. So as you can imagine, we have a lot of ground to cover. Over the course of the next half hour, we're going to take you from the wrongful conviction to the lawsuit currently pending against the Bladen County Sheriff's Office for their missteps in this case. Some of what you will hear will baffle you. We're going to start at the crime scene. The crime scene Joseph Sledge had nothing to do with.
Okay, God, no, I declare, I do declare.
The last time Joseph Sledge was here was 1976, when detectives brought him here.
He said, you want to get out? I said, no, sir, I ain't never been in the people's house and I ain't going in there. That's what I told him. I knew that they were doing something, making moves on me.
Sledge said he wouldn't get out of the car because he didn't want his footprints at a crime scene. To this day, he swears he had nothing to do with.
I know that they knew that I had nothing to do with this.
This house and that crime put Sledge in prison for almost 40 years. But to understand how we got here, we have to rewind to 1976.
This is certainly a case that shocked the conscience of the community. It generated a tremendous amount of publicity locally. It was all people were talking about. And so I can well imagine that there was a considerable amount of pressure from those in the law enforcement community to solve this case.
These are some of the pictures from the 1976 crime scene. The pictures of the victims, 74-year-old Josephine Davis and her 53-year-old daughter Aileen, are too horrifying to broadcast.
Both victims have been brutally assaulted and beaten, and both of them had their dresses pulled up above their waists. And there was blood on the clothing and blood on their legs. Aileen, the younger victim, had had indications of sexual assault.
On the day of the murder, Joseph Sledge was serving a 4-year sentence for misdemeanor larceny at the nearby White Lake prison camp. More than a dozen inmates had escaped from the prison that year, and on that very day, Sledge decided to escape too.
That's a mistake I'm gonna have to regret long as I live, man. That's a daggone truth. Yeah, I jumped that fence right there and came all the way around that fence.
Sledge hid until nightfall, stole a car, and then drove to Dillon, South Carolina. Instantly, he became the obvious suspect in the murders, and when authorities caught up with him a few days later, they were already trying to make their case.
He was taken to the victim's home in the police car, and the deputies wanted him to get out of the car and walk around, and he knew, one, they want to get his footprints near that home, and two, he was afraid they'd shoot him, say he was trying to escape and they'd shoot him. Through all of that, he is their primary suspect.
But as the investigation continued, the facts didn't fit. The bloody shoe prints at the murder scene didn't belong to Sledge. But even more compelling,
they had 2 bloody palm prints on the floor on either side of Aileen's head in a very distinctive position, and that would indicate it was from the rape. And those palm prints in blood did not match the victims and did not match Joseph Sledge. And that was known when he was convicted.
The facts that didn't fit are the reason why Sledge's first trial for the murders resulted in a hung jury. But the pressure for a conviction persisted. When the case was tried for a second time, rising star and future North Carolina Governor Mike Easley was chosen as lead prosecutor. He fought hard on a very particular piece of evidence, strands of pubic hair that he told jurors belonged to Sledge.
At the time, an FBI analyst testified using then hair comparison testimony that there was a match between Joseph Sledge's hair and that recovered from the victim's body.
A match. Guilty, right? Not quite, because the science in the 70s is no comparison to what we have today. And there was a second punch. Testimony from two jailhouse snitches who were paid, yes, paid, to tell the jury that Joseph Sledge confessed to the murders. Did it kind of offend your senses that somebody would be paid for their testimony?
Absolutely.
When we come back, the surviving jailhouse informant takes the stand to explain why he falsely testified against Joseph Sledge. At this point in the story, it is 1976. Joseph Sledge is still innocent until proven guilty, but not for long. A piece of hair analyzed using junk science and two paid snitches are about to change all of that. Donald Sutton, one of the informants who told a jury Sledge confessed to the murders of Josephine and Aileen Baker, died years ago. The other snitch told the jury the same thing. He is still alive and has now changed his story. Herman Baker was a fellow inmate of Joseph Sledge after his arrest following the murders.
He was going to be doing the state a favor by testifying falsely against Joseph Sledge and making sure that he was put away, and in return for his favor to the state, his charges of having drugs in prison would be dropped.
It took until 2014 for his conscience to get the better of him. That's when Herman Baker took the stand before the Innocence Commission to explain why he lied about Sledge all those years ago.
What did you say about the murder?
What I was told to say.
What you were told to say?
Yes.
Who told you to say it?
One of the guards, then the warden at the prison camp.
Herman Baker was given $3,000 in cash, which in 1978 was not small bucks, equivalent to $21,000 today. We actually found the canceled checks.
Another motivator? The second informant had 20 years shaved off his own murder sentence shortly after he testified against Sledge. While it's legal to cut someone a deal for cooperating, Sledge's attorney says it is not legal to feed someone information and then pay them for their testimony. The cash transaction is also disturbing to John David, the man now serving as district attorney.
I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback what the prosecutors did in the late 70s, but I will tell you that relying on the jailhouse snitches is a bad idea.
Two convicted criminals who were paid to testify. Those were the star witnesses in August 1978 in a trial that cost Joseph Sledge the next 37 years of his life.
They know I didn't do it, but they just put the pressure and say you did what you didn't do. See, they're going to live with that till they die. They live with that. They're going to live with that. They got to live with it.
Prosecutors have an ethical obligation not just to secure convictions, but to ensure that the people that are convicted are actually guilty. The worst thing that a prosecutor can ever experience is that an innocent person is sent away. And think about why that's so bad. Not only does it erode public confidence within the system and make closure for the victim's family a sham, but it also subjects the community to the actual killer.
Sledge's sentence and the fight to win his freedom begins now. But we're going to fast forward to 1993 when Sledge gets wind of new DNA technology. For the next 20 years, he writes letter after letter asking for a second shot to prove what he'd been saying all along. Although the murder happened in Bladen County, pretrial publicity prompted Joseph Sledge's trial to be moved to Columbus County. Evidence used to convict him was stored in this closet at the Columbus County Clerk of Court's office. In 1993, Sledge began writing letters requesting DNA analysis of that evidence. His handwritten letters would become very familiar to judges and clerks at the courthouse, the same kind of letters he sent to attorney Chris Muma, the director of the North Carolina Center for Actual Innocence, who ultimately took his case.
His persistence There's one kind of persistence where you just, every year or so you hear from somebody. But then there's the persistence of every month and the same exact stories and the facts that just did not fit together in his case.
A decade after the advent of DNA, one of Sledge's letters finally got the attention of Columbus County Judge William Gore.
So the judge orders this DNA testing. That order gets put into a file and given to the DA's office, and nobody does anything. He's never appointed counsel. The DNA testing is never pursued.
Several more years passed. Joseph has his 60th birthday in prison. And finally, in 2006, after another plea to look for the evidence, District Attorney Rex Gore finds the box from Sledge's case in the Columbus County Courthouse. But the hair from the crime scene that helped seal Sledge's conviction was missing.
Because of the age of the case, the evidence simply couldn't be found. And so it is true that people who were involved signed affidavits saying they conduct searches and couldn't find anything.
We were running out of options, and his file was sitting on the floor next to my desk, and I kept looking at it, knowing that I needed to write the letter telling him I didn't know what else to do. And then that phone call came in at that time.
In 2012, a clerk in the Columbus County Courthouse, dusting in the evidence room, found the missing envelope in Sledge's case. Muma says that blew the case wide open. The North Carolina Innocence Commission, an independent agency created by the state, agreed to review his case. The commission sent crews to the SBI and Bladen County Sheriff's Office, where investigators found evidence from Sledge's case the agencies had sworn was lost or destroyed. Muma says their oversight cost Sledge 10 years of his life.
They found files that we were told didn't exist. They found fingerprints that we were told didn't exist. They found palm prints that we were told didn't exist.
The newly discovered evidence and the recanted testimony from the surviving jailhouse snitch were enough for the Innocence Commission to grant Sledge a hearing in January 2015.
This, of course, is the case of State of North Carolina versus Joseph Sledge, Jr.
The very hairs that helped convict Sledge 37 years earlier now helped prove his innocence.
Have any of the hairs that were found on the body of Aileen Davis matched Mr. Sledge?
None of them.
Based on what I now know, that there is compelling evidence of actual innocence.
John David says Mr. Sledge's wrongful conviction and failure to get relief for decades after his conviction was the result of human error.
Let me just be the first, on behalf of the state of North Carolina, to apologize to Mr. Sledge for that.
It is further ordered that Joseph Sledge, Jr. be immediately released from custody.
Better late than never. But how in the world could this happen? A closer look at that question when we come back, plus a lawsuit against local officials for the missteps that cost Sledge his freedom.
There's a lot of incidents of people failing to do their job, honestly, in Joseph's case.
So that DNA evidence that ultimately cleared Joseph Sledge was missing for 10 years after a judge's order came down for it to be located and tested. 10 more years that an aging Joseph Sledge spent locked in a cell.
That's the only way I got out of that. His mama told me that point blank. You weren't gonna get out of that instead of that DNA. I'd have been there for the rest of my life.
With people's lives literally hanging in the balance, why were local officials not doing a better job keeping track of critical evidence? Center on Actual Innocence Director Chris Muma says it's a problem in evidence rooms across the state. She showed us pictures of buckets collecting rain in the middle of one evidence room and murder weapons lying in the open air, an obvious failure to adequately preserve biological evidence. But she said what Innocence Commission investigators found in Bladen County was shocking.
I think the evidence room in Bladen County was exceptionally bad.
The Bladen County Sheriff's Office and the Columbus County Clerk's Office are now being sued for so poorly managing their evidence rooms, they thought they'd lost the evidence used in Sledge's case. According to the lawsuit, Innocence Inquiry investigators searched the Bladen County Sheriff's evidence room themselves in August of 2013 and found shoe prints and bloody palm prints from the 1976 crime scene in envelopes mailed by the SBI that the Sheriff's Department had never even bothered to open. It's the very evidence Bladen County officials swore no longer existed.
The battles, and I mean battles, of trying to get justice for him after the evidence that proved his innocence was available just highlights so much the problems with the post-conviction process. In their minds, the cases are closed, so it doesn't matter.
It would have been easier for the system to keep me in prison. I mean, because look at all lawsuits, this, that, and all that, and all that.
Because of the pending lawsuit, the sheriff declined our request to look inside their evidence room now. But District Attorney John David said there have been recent and significant improvements under the new sheriff, Jim McVicker.
He is actually using a very sophisticated barcoding system now. It's all centralized into one location. In Bladen County, they're currently building a brand new jail, and a big aspect of that is going to be a new evidence storage facility.
These improvements should help track evidence moving forward and could also help solve cold cases. But what about other inmates who may be just as innocent as Joseph Sledge? Defense attorneys and prosecutors agree there's no question there are others.
Who else is sitting in jail or prison that didn't do it?
Well, I will tell you this, the criminal justice system is a human system, and because it's a human system, mistakes will be made.
It's a system where you are supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But the wrongly convicted find themselves forced to prove their innocence with no post-conviction rights to access the evidence used to convict them.
They didn't do it, but they can't get the proof. They didn't do the crime, but they can't find evidence to prove the case. Now that's the hurting part.
There are 38,000 inmates in the North Carolina state prison system, and Chris Muma says that conservatively, at least 1% of them are innocent. So far, her firm has helped 8 wrongfully convicted inmates obtain their freedom as they weed through the letters and calls from hundreds of other inmates each year begging for help.
Being in prison for something you didn't do, people have no concept of how different that is for being in prison for something you did do. For someone who's innocent, it is this constant question of why did this happen to me? And what did I do to deserve this? The loss and the grief is immeasurable.
Prosecutors like John David are also inundated with claims of innocence.
So when I get those letters, it's very difficult to wade through credible claims of innocence and then people who just have buyer's remorse.
Difficult in part because prosecutors are busy handling the never-ending flow of new criminal cases. But fielding claims of innocence is also problematic because these cases have been closed for a reason.
The conviction that came as a result of a jury trial, if we're going to undo that, they need to know that there's a substantial amount of evidence.
Evidence of innocent people sitting in prison is compelling enough that state lawmakers established the Innocence Inquiry Commission in 2006 to investigate credible claims of innocence.
The case of State of North Carolina versus Joseph Sledge, Jr.
It was the first of its kind in the country, and the commission that ultimately granted Joseph Sledge his freedom. Chris Muma says we're moving in the right direction, but prosecutors across the state still resist efforts to overturn convictions, even when the evidence to prove innocence is there.
I always hope it's going to be the case that changes the way prosecutors approach these cases, and it hasn't happened yet.
Joseph Sledge will be 73 years old in June. He jokes that he feels more like 110.
Yet being in prison, that takes a lot out of you. It takes a lot out of you. Being incarcerated, it takes so much out of you.
He lost prime years of his life. Both of his parents and some of his siblings died while he was in prison. Joseph never had the chance to marry or have children of his own. But despite all he lost, he is looking forward and not back. You're not angry?
No. Why should I be? I mean, thank God I'm free.
More thankful than resentful, more forgiving than vengeful, Joseph agreed to drive from his childhood home in Georgia back to Bladen County in hopes that hearing his story might help someone else.
Being a good example for a change, to help somebody else. I'll be an example to somebody else getting out right now. You know, God send this mom. I'm similar to that Sledge kid there. I'm situation just like his. Would you look at mine too? I just got by chance, you know, by the grace of God, got lucky. That's all. I got fortunate. You know, hadn't you been born coming along, I'd have been in jail for the rest of my life.
Lifelong friend Lorenzo Hudson drove Joseph to North Carolina for this interview. While grateful Joseph finally won his freedom, the pain of what was lost back in 1978 is palpable.
At that time, we poor. We ain't got nobody. Our parents ain't got no money. Joe got them charges. He had to go do the time. He had nothing to fight with.
You've got a tear in your eye just thinking about it.
Just to see him free. That's about all we could ask for.
He was discardable. He was a poor black man who had been in prison for something minor, but it didn't matter. He could be discarded to close this case. For the longest time, I wanted to believe that this was just because investigations were done differently then, and it was just a mistake. But in Joseph's case, I absolutely believe they knew he was innocent when they convicted him.
Sledge filed a lawsuit over the missteps in this case, and the case is expected to go to court later this year. Investigators from the SBI and the Bladen County Sheriff's Office are being sued, along with the clerks from the Columbus County Courthouse who misplaced that critical evidence. But Mike Easley, whose aggressive prosecution of Joseph Sledge cost him his freedom, and District Attorney Rex Gore, whose office for years ignored a judge's order to find and test the DNA evidence in this case, are immune from prosecution and liability. The real killer has never been caught. Thank you so much for joining us for this special half hour. WECT News at 6 starts right now.